Well, ladies and gentlemen, just when you thought the dust had settled between the ANC and the DA, well, the next fight is now on the horizon. And will this new fight break the GNU? It's this all over again. But before we get on to the main video of today, can I yet again remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It really does help. And if you want to support the work that I do here, you're welcome to buy me a coffee. The link is in the description box below. So let's just get straight into the video of today. And I've got a number of topics that I want to talk about. So let's start on the first one. And this is the news that the DA and the ANC are set to lock horns over, well, transformation. This actually comes on the back that the DA says that it will be challenging the government's BEE amendment bill following the adoption of the relevant hiring quotas. Now, this has led various members in the ANC to say that the DA is, well, racist. And because they're racist, they shouldn't be in the GNU, the old chestnut again. And Cyril himself has actually now weighed in and said he's going to have a meeting with the DA to discuss why the DA has a grudge against transformation. Now, before I even start on this, actually this becomes interesting because you see, no one actually has a beef with transformation. Everybody agrees that they would like to see the previously disadvantaged poor black individual graduate into the middle class and to have a good income and a very stable life. What most people object to is their wealth being redistributed, effectively stolen from them, in order to give to others without. This type of Robin Hood mentality sounds good in fiction, but very rarely appeals to individuals in real life. Now, unfortunately, this has actually had a knock-on effect to forms of the ANC's parliamentary caucus, who now expresses deeply anti-DA sentiment. This obviously after the whole budget scenario, because as you know, the DA were instrumental in getting the previous budget struck down. Now, this meant that at the weekend, many of the ANC's parliamentary caucus expressed a desire for the ANC to kick out the DA from the GNU because of this latest potential court case on the Employment Equity Amendment Act. But one does not forget that Enoch Godongwana now has to create a new budget. This new budget, this third budget, will have to go before the relevant committees and be adopted. And it's going to be very difficult to adopt a budget without the DA. So, let's watch this space and see what happens. Now, on to the next news, and this is actually the news that Patrice at the weekend was trying to explain how he intended to get the voters of Gauteng to vote unanimously for the ANC in the next municipal elections. Many individuals are noticing the ANC's declining support in that province. Now, according to Panyaza, the ANC didn't lose support. Yeah, okay, they didn't get 50%, but that's not because they lost support. It's because one of their proxies, one of their splinter factions, yep, he says faction of the party, in other words, the MK party, led by former President Jacob Zuma, they got all the other votes. And if only they had got the votes themselves, then they would have been in a very dominant position. Interesting take. So you may look at that and say, well, why exactly is this whole thing occurring? Why is Panyaza talking about this complete, well, rubbish? And the actual reason is because of the fight to see who is going to lead the ANC at the next elective conference, when Cyril will effectively, by all reports, step aside and say, well, I've done my terms and it's time for someone else. The question is, who's going to take over? Many individuals are starting to put their names forward, and we've already seen the first individual trying to push himself forward for that position in the guise of Paul Mashatile. The problem is Paul has the personality of a drowned fish, so there's unlikely to garner the support he needs in order to take that position. But this hasn't stopped Paul from at least trying and at least building some kind of, persona to get him elected. But you see, he's up against some stiff competition in the guise of Fikile and Balula, because at the weekend, Fikile had this to say about the ANC.
Kufuneka kucinezelwe. That's why today, the Liberation Movement, the African National Congress says, uyabanjwa ubanjelwa unyoluka. Andivakali mfundisi. Okay. Uyabanjwa zimele geqe. Stand on your own. Step aside. Because the ANC did not send people to steal. It sent people to serve the people. Uba umbalula unyolukile ufaka izandla zakhe etilini lisela makabanjwe. Doesn't matter. And they must face the consequences. I-ANC abantu leyo. I-ANC eyaziyo umohluko phakathi ko donakele and at the same time what is wrong.
Now, you see, this is relevant because, you see, as the Secretary General of the ANC, Fikile Mbalula is very keen to discipline any individuals that, well, might actually put themselves forward as the future presidents of the ANC. Because according to Fikile, that's his job. And as the Secretary General, he says he's going to discipline anybody who tries to take his job. It looks like there's going to be lots of infighting in the road to the elective conference. So all I can say is, grab that popcorn. But you see, one name that has cropped up that I don't think many individuals expected to pop up was actually the name of Patrice Motsepe. Now, why that name becomes interesting is, well, he would actually probably make a decent individual in the ANC. Figuratively speaking, that is. But you see, why it's also more important is because individuals are starting to understand something very important about the ANC itself. And that is that the elective conference, the bid to run the ANC, to run that party as if it's going to be the party of glory, the party that gets them through to the presidency, no longer guaranteed, because as this clip highlights, the ANC is a shit show. Have a watch.
Even Motsepe is going to confuse the DA. And this thing about him entering politics, by the way, is real. I know something about it. And if you look at his conduct, he has been pumping a lot of money to churches. He has been pumping a lot of money and causing up with traditional leaders. He's been doing a lot of stuff in preparation of this presidential project. So it's real. But his mistake, and I whispered into the ear of someone close to him. I said he must forget about the ANC. The ANC is a carcass. His mistake is that he wants to enter politics through the ANC, and he believes that he can rescue the ANC. Terrible mistake. The ANC will drag him down. The ANC is not rescuable. It's a dead weight. If you think you can carry it, it's going to drag him down. So his impact will be to confuse the DA, but he's not going to rescue the ANC because the MK guys will not support him. And in fact, they will ratchet up their white monopoly capital sloganeering against him. So he's not going to shift anything politically very much. He thinks he can. Let him try, and you ask me when he has failed.
And I think most of you will actually agree with the sentiment here. Many individuals are fighting for the leadership of the ANC, but the reality is there isn't really much left to lead. The party itself is in decline. Electorally, most people don't really have any respect for the ANC. So it's curious as to why they're still pushing it as if it's actually as relevant as it once was. It's not. And that's actually going to be seen in the actual elective conference. The excitement, I think, is pretty much gone. And I guess let's get on to the main topic of today. And it's a topic that I really want to talk about. And actually, this comes across following the news that Parliament is considering regulating podcasters. And I want you to watch the clip yourself. Here it is.
Now, some worry that this may risk infringing on freedom of expression and stifling digital creativity. Podcasts, by some, are seen as this platform where you have the freedom to say what you really think. What's your response to that, the fear that this might stifle creativity?
Nothing could be further from the truth. And I want to start from a point that says, as South Africans, we have lived through a history of censorship, a history where people were not allowed to freely impart their ideas. And the last thing I believe that any South African wants would be a return to that. So we believe and we will always protect the constitutionally enshrined right to freedom of expression. But as we do so, we also have a responsibility and as an obligation as South Africans, and I think also as people who have these platforms or who utilize these platforms, to and also protect the right to equality, the right to dignity, the right to privacy, because all of these are rights in our constitution. Now, if you just look at our regulatory framework in the country, you can take print media, you can take broadcasting media. South Africa opted for a system that is part co-regulation, part self-regulation, largely self-regulation. You have members of the media, and the media, unfortunately, at this point in time, which is the point I was making around the legal vacuum, the media is defined in the Broadcasting Act as being either community, commercial, or public broadcasting. So it doesn't extend far enough to your online media. But those media organizations have come together in voluntary associations such as the Press Council, in the case of print, where they join up, they adhere, they agree, they write up, agree and adhere to a code of practice or a code of ethics. And then whenever people need, recourse or remedy from any harmful expression in the media, they're able to approach those bodies. Similarly, the Broadcasting Complaints Commission for your radio and TV broadcasts.
Now, in typical fashion, this type of regulation would actually benefit certain individuals, such as News 24. But one has to ask the question of why they want to control podcasts. And this should actually become relatively easy to understand. The previous election in the United States was heavily swayed by Donald Trump going through and actually doing interviews on all the top podcasts around the country. Many individuals say it was things such as Joe Rogan's show that helped Trump win the election. On top of that, many individuals now use podcasts such as this one to actually get their news. And what that's meant is that the traditional legacy media is suffering, and that many individuals no longer trust what the legacy media has to tell them. But this raises some very interesting questions, such as, this idea that podcasts as well, they need to be held accountable for what they say, because what they say now carries a lot more weight than previously it would have. And yeah, I can agree with that to a degree. But then I would also have to ask the question of why we assume that legacy media is immune from these issues. Let's use the example of News 24. Their Hall of Fame, just recently itself, is, kind of shocking. Let's use the example of the doxing of Twitterbus, where they actually exposed an individual on X, the person who goes through as the handle of the boer, and he basically shows what's happening in terms of farm murders online. Well, they actually doxed his identity, said where he works, said what his real name is, gave all of his details. Basically, ethically, they had zero consideration to his own personal privacy. The press actually abused their position. And watch the space. Something's going to happen on that front, I have no doubt, because I'm pretty sure they weren't supposed to do this. But then let's actually go a little bit further. There's the issue of the Jaco case around the supposed child rape claim. Even the police minister admitted that this was an error and publicly apologized. But that's not a claim that just disappears off your record. That's a stigma that you carry for the rest of your life. What about the Jan Bra incident, where there was supposedly racism over a booty roll? Yeah, yet again, that had to be retracted too, because it was false. And what we're seeing is very much this approach of publish first, apologize later, zero accountability. Gator McKenzie has had frequent issues with News 24, that News 24 has been told to apologize and retract from the actual SA Press Council. We could use the example of the Jerome misreporting, where they talked about the terminated Bozeman mandated ESCOM, which they had to retract, and so forth and so forth and so forth. Like, we could be here all day. But the reality is, if you really want to talk about supposed disinformation, legacy media has quite a lot to answer for. And I find it weird that they would want to basically regulate podcasts. I can kind of understand why they might say that, but this idea that they're not doing it to stifle freedom of expression, to silence those in positions such as my own, I don't buy it. But that's just my view. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Until tomorrow, bye.